Hello and welcome to Cannamantv. My name is Conor Macelod, and in this very exciting interview I chat with the founder of Cedar Future, Guy Coxall. Cedar Future is a campaign which uses civil disobedience to inform those unaware of the benefits of cannabis and to highlight the injustice and damage that cannabis prohibition has had. In this interview, we discuss the revolutionary report produced by Cedar Future, which perfectly outlines the central points surrounding cannabis prohibition with fact-based evidence, showing the harm caused by cannabis is disproportionately low when compared with other recreational substances such as alcohol, tobacco, and even caffeine. Covering the cannabis industry, its importance for health, the illegitimacy of prohibition, the need for cannabinoids to be given a classification on their own, sustainable agriculture, and the future of cannabis in the UK, this interview is one not to be missed. So, make sure and like and subscribe, and be sure to follow the channel on Patreon, where your support contributes towards a greater platform for raising cannabis awareness. Now then, let's talk cannabis. So thank you very much for chatting with me, Guy.
You're welcome.
So just to get started off then, it's like the section 1 we have is titled Why Care About Cannabis, and I'll just ask you that question directly then. It's like, why should people care about cannabis? Individuals that use recreationally or medicinally excluding, why should people that have never touched cannabis, have no interest in it, care about this plant?
Because it's the most important plant we possess. It's been used for at least 10,000 years. It's probably considered the first agricultural plant which has led to our civilization as we know it today. It's been used as a medicine for over 5,000 years, especially in Chinese medicine, 1,000 years in Indian medicine. It's the only plant that works on what we call an endocannabinoid system, which regulates all of your systems, and that creates wholeness or homeostasis, and that prevents disease. So as a medicine, it's invaluable, and of course it's natural as well. But then there's the recreational side. People use it for relaxation. I think it's medical to a certain degree. People use it as a relaxant. They use it to reduce anxiety, different mental health problems, as we do with alcohol. But of course, alcohol is a lot more dangerous. As for then, there's the industrial applications, which a lot of people seem to forget. It's normally referred to as hemp, but really it's cannabis. And the work that we've been doing for the last few years with Hemp Tank, which is I'm the chairman of Hemp Tank, which is the UK's think tank for the hemp industry. And we think that we could mitigate 80% of climate emissions in 10 years if we put the infrastructure in. There's so many new technologies. So if you're not interested in the medicinal, the recreational side, if you're an environmentalist, it's hugely important.
Yeah. So exactly that. So even innovation would inevitably follow, which would then obviously push towards a more eco-friendly, sustainable future.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the innovation that's coming out, I work with scientists around the globe, and some of the new technologies, one of the best ones is graphene technology, where it replaces normal graphene. It's 4 million times cheaper, and you can make batteries which outcompete lithium ion without having to mine anything, and solar panels. So you can actually have microgrid and off-grid systems which could replace the national grid, so we can have sustainable energy from cannabis.
The economic boost for individuals that are in unemployment or individuals who are looking for a new lease in the industry, cannabis is a viable option?
Yeah, I mean, especially at the moment, what we're experiencing with COVID-19, we're facing the biggest economic crash in history, and we need to rethink things. So this new normal that the government keeps saying we're going to have, it should be based with the cannabis industry. We could create a whole new green industrial revolution, which would not only help mitigate climate change and help the environment, but it would create endless jobs, boost the economy, exactly what we need right now.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been a more perfect time, essentially, for this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately so, but the reality is it's absolutely impeccable timing. The fact is, when you produced your report and it became available on Facebook, I just thought that, I was like, there's never been a time that this has been more applicable on such a diverse spectrum of influence for society. As you've mentioned, health, agriculture, the economy, it's unparalleled, to say the least. So a lot of people might be fearful that cannabis, almost a century's worth of propaganda has been ingrained in the subconscious of the many. So a lot of people, their knee-jerk response will be, cannabis is a dangerous drug that's going to have a negative impact on psychological well-being, society will crumble, etc., etc. How would you respond to people that say cannabis is a dangerous narcotic?
It's the opposite. One of the main aspects of the report is it demonstrates that there is no evidence for the harms of cannabis. It's quite the opposite. It can help improve mental health. It can help our our diet. The seed is really nutritious. A lot of people don't think about the seed. Those on plant-based diets, those with a vegetarian or a vegan diet, it's as good as meat, really. I mean, you've got the hemp seed is about 30% protein, the same sort of protein that we produce naturally in our plasma, so it's very digestible.
Right.
It contains all 21 amino acids and the perfect ratios of omegas 3 and 6, better than fish oil. So it's brilliant for our food security as well. If we can get farmers growing it, that's really what we need, especially as the climate changes. So it's just, I mean, you're right. It's been nearly a century, of propaganda telling us all it's a dangerous narcotic, and this is what our parents have told us, our grandparents. But it was all based on lies, based on propaganda.
Actually, sadly ironic that the entirety of the propaganda age, if you want to call it that, has been based in preventing so-called harm, claiming this plant to be extremely detrimental to health, and then we flip it around and actually the so-called harm was caused of prohibition, and the damage on health is the lack of endocannabinoid interaction.
I seriously believe that having cannabinoids removed from our diet for the last century has caused a lot of harm and created a lot more illness. I mean, they talk about harm of cannabis, which there's no evidence for, as we've worked out. But you look at even sugar. Sugar meets the criteria for a Schedule 1 drug, which means it has no medicinal value. It's highly dangerous because it's carcinogenic, it causes cancer, and it's highly addictive. So, that fits the criteria perfectly for a Schedule 1 drug, as does caffeine, as does tobacco, as does alcohol. Cannabis doesn't fit any of those criteria.
Is that, I mean, just perfectly leading us on to then, when cannabis was initially prohibited, following the 1937 marijuana tax, that obviously in the US, then obviously pushing forward to 1961 with the UN Drug Convention, that then led for the UK for to have the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1971, which is essentially I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the soundboard for why cannabis is prohibited in the UK in the first place. So the Misuse of Drugs Act, is that like the umbrella, essentially, which maintains prohibition in the UK?
Yeah, you can see a timeline of, like you mentioned, the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act. It was all based on ideology and racism, and it was to benefit corporations. The prohibition of cannabis has given the monopoly to big corporations, especially the pharmaceutical industry, the oil industry, fossil fuels, cotton, timber. And that's moved forward. The campaign carried on until 1961, when we had the UN Drugs Convention, and it actually goes into the evidence that was produced by the World Health Organization in 1955. Can I read you a quick bit from that, just to show you how silly it is?
Yeah,
because
we
all know that, we all know, even if you're against cannabis, it doesn't turn you into a murderer.
Yeah.
So this is one little extract. Under the influence of cannabis, the danger of committing unpremeditated murder is very great. It can happen in cold blood without any reason or motive, unexpectedly without any preceding quarrel. Often the murderer does not even know the victim and simply kills for pleasure. And that was some of the evidence from the World Health Organization in 1955. 6 years later, it became a Schedule 1 drug globally. And when we got to the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act, it became automatically a Schedule 1 drug, meaning it has no medicinal value, is highly dangerous and highly addictive, based on that.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any evidence to start with. And that's carried on. And, we've asked everybody possible for the evidence, the clear scientific evidence that the Home Office consistently say they have, and it just doesn't exist.
It was actually, when I was reading over that exact part that you just quoted there, I actually laughed at the time. However, it's not a laughing matter, let's be honest, but it's hysterical.
I did as well.
Yeah. Anybody that knows, anybody that's had any form of interaction with cannabis is immediately met with this level of lunacy. It's almost satirical when you're watching over this, when you're reading over some of the things that these so-called authorities were aware of, that were proclaiming it that way. It's like, it's so far from the truth, it's embarrassing, really.
It is, yeah. The fact that it's still there, though, that's just insane.
Well, that's the thing. You perfectly articulated that in your report when you refer to it as that it's the Misuse of Drugs Act, and in particular, was it the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs who scientifically advised the legislation behind the Misuse of Drugs Act, that they were supposed to evolve over time. The intention was to evolve through scientific process. So as the science evolves, so too with the advisory council's input. And yet 50 years later, there's been a rigid non-movement of that legislation. Do you think that that's a wall that immediately needs to be destroyed in order to move forward in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, one extract that we used was a report by the Home Affairs Scientific Committee in 2006, a damning report against the AECMD, which found that the classification system in the Misuse of Drugs Act is completely unevidenced and not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
At the time, the then Home Secretary was supposed to do a review, and that was 15 years ago. There's not been any review. The classification system is exactly the same, still not working, still not evidence-based. It's just political. And, the problem is, the reason I'm so passionate about this is people are suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I know so many people who are suffering day in, day out, who are having to grow their own cannabis because they can't afford a prescription or get a prescription. They're risking their freedoms by, being sent through the judicial system, worrying about whether their kids are going to get taken away from them for a plant, a non-toxic plant. It needs to change.
Without a doubt. And one of the things that, just before I read exactly what you mentioned there, the Damning report, Drug Classification, Making a Hash of It, published in 2006 by the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee, they said it makes it clear that the Ministry of the Misuse of Drugs Act classification system and scale of harm are based on political objectives with no scientific evidence on which to draw any policy decisions. Immediately detrimental to any forward-thinking society, because if you're applying any form of legislation with absolutely no scientific merit behind it, that's a subjective application based on individuals that are applying it. So if they have a complete bias or self-serving interest based on a particular law being in place, that's extremely counterintuitive to the society that's looking to these people to prevent them from harm.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. We as the people have to trust in the laws. So do the police. I mean, the police will normally say, we don't write the laws, we just enforce them. But they do have they do have to do due diligence and look into these things. And now that we've exposed the truth, hopefully things will change.
One of the things you mentioned as well about going through the judicial system, if you get caught cultivating cannabis or even in the possession of cannabis, that in itself is a black mark, a criminal record for something that's extremely benevolent, to say the least. But it's also the thing that I've found with individuals that consume cannabis on a regular basis, and because of this the prohibition that's in place, there's a relative stigma. So you've got people that, if I was to use the term, in the closet when it comes to using cannabis, because they're too frightened to admit that they engage in this plant, when the reality is, it's again the irony that they're actually engaging in something that's far more beneficial for their health than what the government promotes as a recreational substance in alcohol or tobacco.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, 90% of all drug-related deaths are from alcohol and tobacco, 40 times more than illicit drugs. And as we've always said, cannabis is healthy. All right, maybe smoking it isn't the healthiest way of taking it, but there are other ways. But and a lot of people mix it with tobacco, which obviously can cause problems in themselves. So.
But same again, though, your report highlights that smoking cannabis actually doesn't have any detrimental impact on the lungs themselves. I think you had, I think it was individuals in Jamaica, I don't have the thing right here, but they were smoking, which was extremely impressive, like a ½ ounce worth of joints, like a joint with a ½ ounce in it, I think. And they were doing that over the course of 50 years, and there was no detrimental impact to the functioning of their lungs, or their cognitive capacity for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, if that isn't proof, what is?
Exactly. And the cognitive element was actually quite interesting, because, as you're aware, one of the main stigmas in the UK when it comes to cannabis use is this supposed schizophrenic response, that individuals can get schizophrenia and all that rhetoric, essentially. And your report's shown clearly that that's completely absent. There is no acknowledgement of schizophrenia caused by cannabis use. You have Lester Grinspoon, obviously notorious for studying schizophrenia, who makes it clear that this does not happen. This is not true. This is a fallacy, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, globally, it's stayed at about 1% schizophrenia. But over the last 50 years, the rate of cannabis use has grown exponentially, and it's stayed at 1%. So obviously, there would be a difference in the line if it was cannabis based. I mean, but don't get me wrong. I mean, there is a small amount of risk for a small proportion of the population with cannabis if they're predisposed to psychosis or schizophrenia, if they have a very high THC strain of cannabis, it can actually bring on the symptoms. But of course, what the government aren't thinking about is if they were to have maybe a CBD prevalent strain, which is antipsychotic and anti-anxiety naturally, that would actually work as a better, safer treatment than what they get from pharmaceuticals.
Again, one of the frustrating things because of prohibition, it's actually caused, again, a lot more harm because, as you mentioned, there has been individuals that have consumed high-strength THC, largely because the black market prioritises that. They're looking for money, they're not looking for any form of safety measure. Whereas if we did have this in place years ago, there might have been a lot of individuals who, as you've said, are sensitive, their endocannabinoid system could be sensitive, or just their physiology in general, their mental health, their genetic susceptibility to mental illness. All of these things could have been avoided on the basis of just having legalization. So it is an extremely unfortunate consequence of prohibition, again, under the guise of safety, when it's caused none of that.
Yeah, I mean, the prohibition is the harm.
The evidence that cannabis is safe is overwhelming in comparison to evidence that cannabis is harmful, because there is none. Essentially, the harm that, as you've just mentioned, is a small portion of individuals who are already sensitive to it. And there is always that, no matter what you do, you have people that are sensitive to caffeine. They don't make caffeine illegal. One of the things as well that I like to use as an example is you have individuals that have epilepsy, and yet they still make films that contain flashing images. They just provide a warning. And this is the same method that should be applied to cannabis. You have individuals that are sensitive. If you provide a warning, it's the exact same liberty that's given to numerous other factors in society. But for some reason, cannabis is not allowed that same liberty.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same with the CBD industry. Excuse me. I'm not sure if you know, I used to be the compliance director for the Cannabis Trades Association. So I was heavily involved.
Yeah. Sorry, what was it, sir?
Yeah. So I was heavily involved in putting the regulations together, especially labeling for CBD products and things. And, every substance has some degree of harm, even water, you can do it, and CBD, it has been found that not really in what you would get in a CBD supplement, but if you had very high levels of CBD and you're on like a blood thinner, it can actually work as a blood thinner and actually cause problems in that way. Everything has a certain amount of danger, but with cannabis, it's so minute. And as you say, if we have warnings on things, and of course, if you've got a regulated market, unlike the black market, you would actually be able to get them tested, and you would know when you buy it what levels of CBD to THC it's got, so you know what you're getting. If you think about it like alcohol, you can go into a wine shop and you can get anything from a low strength lager up to a bottle of absinthe. Young people, when they start drinking, they don't start off on the high spirits, or some of them do, but they normally end up in A&E after a night and don't do it again. But it's the same with cannabis. If you go straight for a very high, like 30% THC strain, you're going to probably have a whitey and maybe have paranoia and feel pretty bad. But if you start off with a lower THC and a higher CBD, you can slowly build up to what suits you.
It really does highlight the level of complexity when it comes to cannabis, that these things. I mean, often I'm talking to these people, talking to individuals on a daily basis about cannabis, and I got said by somebody the other day, says it's a bit like a rabbit hole. That's what this feels like. It's like you go down and down and down. All of a sudden, it's just so impactful, and there's so many diverse elements. If I was to just find that sheet of paper that you mentioned about the cannabinoids element, because I think it was Transform, the drug policy group, that had actually written the basis of sorry, it's all over the shop here.
That's okay.
Yeah, here it is. Here it's like just to highlight what you're mentioning there about the basis of the impact that cannabis has in relation to alcohol and tobacco. So Transform Drug Policy Foundation stated, it is this omission from the classification system that perhaps more than any other truly lays bare its fundamental lack of consistency, reasoning or evidence base on the grounds that together tobacco and alcohol cause approximately 40 times the total number of deaths from any illegal drugs combined, as you've just mentioned. This equates to 90% of all drug-related deaths. Transform then continue with, any and all medical authorities will acknowledge that by far the greatest harm to public health from drugs stems from alcohol and tobacco use. Is extremely frightening, considering alcohol and tobacco use, even though they're the most damaging recreational substances in the world, are never discussed as a means of should they be in society or they're not. Even though it's evident that there is so much harm caused. I think there's 1 in 5 deaths every minute is caused by alcohol. 5% of all diseases globally are caused by alcohol-related use. So why is this the case, that we're dealing with a plant that's helpful for your endocannabinoid system?
It's not actually in the report. I mean, the report's 50 pages, and that was small. I mean, I could write an encyclopedia on this, really. The reason cannabis is, the reason alcohol and tobacco are not classed as drugs per se is because they're traditional. It's a UN clause where the UN said that drugs that are traditional will not, regardless of their danger, will not be scheduled. But newer drugs will be. And this I find quite funny, because if you think about cannabis, as I said, it's been used for like 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Even in the UK itself, King Henry VIII's time, it was law that people had to grow cannabis for the Royal Navy. And back then it would have been about 4 to 6% THC. So it was cannabis, not what we have with hemp today, which is very, very low THC. And people were using it back then. And it was years after that tobacco was discovered and brought over to the UK. So we've got evidence that cannabis was more traditional in the UK than tobacco, and globally, certainly. So, how they decided that it wasn't traditional is beyond me, really.
It must either be ignorance or purposeful lack of acknowledging the evidence, which is...
I think the latter is more realistic.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's like I say, Guy, there is absolutely just an enormous... I'm sitting here really frustrated because I want to talk about absolutely everything you've written here, man, but we can't, because I'm trying my best to try and narrow it down as good as I can. So I mean, we mentioned...
the same with writing the report.
I could fully imagine, because I was reading over it and it's really difficult. Same again, because cannabis is so diverse. There is an encyclopedia. You probably have to have a dozen encyclopedias, one for industry, one for the agriculture, one for the health, one for the basis of prohibition. It's absolutely ludicrous. But again, extremely exciting, considering that I don't really think there's ever been a time. It seems like, I don't know about yourself, but there certainly seems to be something happening in the UK that's never happened before. Just a movement, and I think COVID has had a huge impact on it, and individuals that are in positions of influence are seeing the monetary value instead of the basis of helping society. Whereas I think in my mind it's 6 and a half a dozen. If it becomes passed, then legally I think it's a good thing anyway. But we'll get to that anyway. Sorry, we'll get to that at the end. So yeah, so I mean, you've perfectly articulated there that there is no harm towards cannabis use. Like, the harm is caused by prohibition itself, which brings me perfectly to the basis of government prosecution. So for the government to, as you've perfectly articulated, is for the government to prosecute anybody on the basis of cannabis use under the Controlled Substance, there has to be evidence based in it being a harm to society itself. So if I was to just find the Freedom of Information request here.
I mean, the Freedom of Information requests, we sent them out to every police and crime commissioner in the UK, the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, the Home Office, and the ACMD. And they were all, the police especially, were all scrabbling around, we don't have the information, maybe contact the police, maybe contact the Home Office, it was half amusing. Half not.
Yeah, well, I could see why it wouldn't be half not. So on Section 4, just before Section 4 is, are those enforcing these laws the real criminals? But just prior to that, obviously we've got no evidence, no crime. The whole basis of no evidence, no crime is to show, as we've just mentioned there, that cannabis doesn't provide any evidence of harm, therefore there is no crime. In order to make sure the government is justified by prosecuting an individual, as we've just mentioned, we have to have evidence behind this. Your group impressively sent out, was it 45 in total?
There were 42, 45 in total, 42 PCCs, the CPS, the Home Office, and the ACMD.
So that's substantial. I think that's one of the things that sets your report apart from any other report I've read, is that there's never been this quantity of freedom of information requests. And the basis of any democratic society is exactly this, that we could receive this information on the basis that these individuals are supposed to be safeguarding us from legitimate harm. So the freedom of information requests that you sent out, if I was to just read these over here, it's like you've got one, foundation evidence for the claim that all genus of cannabis meets the currently accepted criteria for a Schedule 1 substance in its raw form. Number 2, foundation evidence for the claim that cannabinoid preparations meet the currently accepted criteria for Schedule 1 substance. Foundation evidence for the claim that cannabis is a controlled substance in the UK, and who is making that claim of control. Foundation evidence for what is considered misuse of raw cannabis and its various preparations. and the clear scientific evidence of physical and mental harm and harm to communities resultant from the use of cannabis to justify the Class B penalty as per the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act. So these were sent out to the Home Office, the Crown Prosecution Service and the police, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so far, I mean, it says here, of the 45 freedom of information requests, 78% have responded to confirm no evidence is held. Almost 80%. 4% refused to provide any information, and 22% are yet to respond. 44% telling us maybe the police have it, which is relatively comical. Just maybe the police have it, just out there. 2% confirming the police do have the information. 5% forwarding us to the Home Office, and 5% forwarding us to the Advisory Council for, misuse of drugs. So when your initial response came through of almost 80% of these, the foundations which allow prosecution in the first place, and you're finding out that essentially 80% is invalid or absent, what's going through your mind at the time? Because this is evidence that anybody that's been prosecuted prior to this report has been illegally imprisoned.
Yeah, so most of them said they didn't have the evidence. One police force said they did have the evidence, but they haven't provided any. The only people who did say they had the evidence was the Home Office, but the links that they sent was all hearsay. There wasn't any substantial evidence, which is what we expected, really. So it was just to confirm our suspicions.
Yeah, but it provided legitimacy behind this illegitimate form of prohibition. It's like you can't enforce a law without any foundation. This is not a tyranny. This is not some fascist state. It's certainly not supposed to be. But yet this shows that there's at the very least an ulterior motive, perhaps a professional level of ignorance behind applying these laws. I mean, is this just a complete absence? Is this from the 1970s and they've just left the law where it is, and unfortunately we've had victims through using cannabis that have been prosecuted?
I would like to think that, but I think there's a bigger agenda there. There's some corruption. I mean, a lot of people are aware of GW Pharmaceuticals, who have produced some cannabis-based medicines, and Victoria Atkins, who was former Home Secretary. Her husband had 21% shares in GW, right. And Theresa May, when she was the Secretary of State, her husband also was getting financial from GW Pharmaceuticals, and at the same time they're both on record saying cannabis has no medicinal value. So really it was a conflict of interest, and you have to wonder, how many MPs and people in the force, maybe within their pensions, are getting money from pharmaceutical companies as well as oil companies. And it's going back to the 1937. It's all to do with these big corporations having the monopolies, and that may be still happening today. I can't say, I haven't got any evidence of the corruption, but it does seem possible.
It certainly seems self-evident, in all honesty, that you're dealing with a situation, in particular when you hear through all the groups on Facebook and you hear through other aspects of social media, children not getting medicine, regional issues, but you've got some people in the second town over that are able to receive it, and you've got people that can't receive medicine, and then there's certain medicines that are allowed and certain that are not. And the basis of it is, it's the Hippocratic Oath. It's supposed to be, if somebody's in pain and you're able to resolve that, that's supposed to be the case. So it begs the question of, well, what is going on?
I mean, from a doctor's perspective, the endocannabinoid system is not taught in biology or medicine school. So it's probably one of the most important biological discoveries in recent times. And doctors aren't aware of it, and that's intentional as well. It's been hidden from history. In 1941, cannabis was removed from the US pharmacopoeia. In 1937, it was removed from the UK's pharmacopoeia. But did you know you could still get cannabis preparations in pharmacies up until 1973, 2 years after the Misuse of Drugs Act was implemented? So for all the MPs to say there's no medicinal value when after the law was implemented, it was still available in pharmacies is a joke.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. It almost sounds like a movie. Do you know when you hear some of this stuff, it's bizarre that this actually happens and has continued to happen. It's really bizarre. I mean, like I said, I've always been interacting with cannabis like since the age of 13, essentially. And the whole way through, it's always been told that it's bad for you, it's addictive, it'll psychologically impair you, and etc., etc., etc. And none of these things have happened. It was fear. It was a fear-based proposal by adults that had been brainwashed. And this is embarrassing that we're still in a situation here where we're trying to get across, because now we're in a situation where back then they didn't have science. Now we have scientific evidence that not only is cannabis healthy for you, it's essential for your physiological functioning.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the whole point, really. That's the whole point of the report, to get that out, not just to MPs and the police, but out to the public, get the general public realising the truth, and because it's important for everyone's health and the health of the planet.
One of the things I think's helped in a big way is CBD. The availability of CBD has certainly pushed cannabis right in the face of everybody. And one of the things at the end of the report that you've suggested, that's in the end, section 5, we'll just briefly cover it now, is that you're not asking for cannabinoids to be included in any other pre-existing category. You want them to be in their own category, such as vitamins, minerals, and then a category of cannabinoids. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so when I worked for the CTA, I had lots of meetings with the Food Standards Agency, the MHRA, the Medical and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, and it was passing the hot potato, really. Neither of them really wanted to touch cannabinoids because cannabis doesn't fit in the medical model. When you have a medicine, it has to go through clinical trials, and you have to get a certain percentage of success rate. But of course, because everybody's endocannabinoid system functions at a different rate, and people will react to different cannabinoid profiles, so maybe a high THC, low CBD, or vice versa, it's not an exact science because you're using a natural plant. So it doesn't fit in the medical model, which makes it very difficult in that category. And it's not, although it is essential to health, it's not really a food. Cannabinoids are probably more similar to vitamins and minerals, where they're essential to health. You have to have your vitamin C or your vitamin D to be able to function properly. And vitamin C, for instance, you can eat an orange and you're getting your vitamin C that way as a food, or it can be prescribed by a doctor in higher amounts as a medicine. It's somewhere in between. And we really need a new category and a regulatory system to portray it and make it available to everybody in a safe way.
And how do you think that would be able to be approached nowadays as a legitimate option?
We've already seen it in Canada, in the States. We've already got a cannabis industry here. It's just add THC. We've got the CBD industry. It's already there. We've already got all the tests, the labs who do all the tests for mycotoxins, heavy metals, and so on, because cannabis is a phytoremediator. So if it's grown in a toxic soil, it will absorb those toxins into the plant. So you need to make sure, you grow it organically, really. So you have to test any product that goes into the market. It needs to be regulated to a certain degree to make sure it's safe and your weights and measures are right. So there's not much work to do that. It's pretty much in place. And we should have places like pubs for alcohol where you can go and socialize, places you can go and buy it. So it would be similar to the alcohol system, really.
Right. So are you a proponent of recreational cannabis clubs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, people can go somewhere and socialize and do it safely. And, it's safely, you can do it anywhere really, at home safely, but, it's nice to have that community spirit like you do get with pubs.
Yeah, it's certainly a substance which encourages benevolence and camaraderie, because you find often where you have friends that are growing something, they're very eager to allow you to try it, and it's not a selling point, it's more along the lines of a pride, achievement, look what I've done, that kind of thing. And that's certainly something that you receive through friends and stuff like that. So the last section of the report is section 5, moving forward, and in it, just before we just touch on that, you've written here, those enforcing the laws are the real criminals. And in it, you give the PACE, PACE code, which the police have to engage with in order to be legitimate, essentially, in order to avoid corruption and to stay true to the foundations of what the police are supposed to represent. So at this moment in time, what would you say is the biggest hurdle that the police are dealing with when it comes to integrating cannabis safely into the approach of them, like making sure that it's not hurting anybody, but at the same time being told by most people, such as this conversation, that cannabis actually doesn't hurt you in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, the police are changing, you know. I mean, you've got County Durham, the West Midlands, some of Wales, where the police are actually doing a de facto decriminalisation and they're not enforcing cannabis, or if anything, maybe giving a bit of advice and a bit of education and possible treatment if somebody needs it. Although there's about less than 1% of cannabis users who go into treatment, and a lot of that I suspect is through the judicial system,
Yeah,
get prosecuted or go to treatment,
yeah,
as we've seen in the States. So, you know, I think really the police, you know, we're not going after the police. We have served the police with this information throughout the UK, and it's given them the responsibility, the ability to respond. So, you know, police officers are legally independent. You know, they're not supposed to be told to arrest somebody because the government says it. They're supposed to do their own due diligence and look into it and find the evidence. Now, it's easy to find the evidence of possession or cultivation, but they haven't looked at the evidence of the law itself. Now that we've done the due diligence for them and presented that evidence, they should respond to that and cease enforcing, because one, they're in breach of their attestation, which is when they swear their oath to become a police constable. And also they'll be in breach of Pace Code G, as you just mentioned, where it would actually be illegal to make that arrest if they're in the knowledge that there isn't any law evidence to support the law itself. So potentially, now that this report has gone to the police could be on the wrong side of the law if they enforce it, which could create a de facto decriminalisation across the entire United Kingdom, or at least that's the hope.
yeah. It would certainly be the most logical decision, because I think if the police were to disregard the information you provided here, I mean, this is evidence based. This isn't I encourage everybody, download the report, read it, and share it, because all the information we're talking about here is in the report, and that's one of the things that it'll become very obvious that there's a hidden agenda or just a flat out disregard of information, because you have provided it for them. And it'd be very interesting to catch up with you in the week or two, Guy, to see what, if you do hear back to do with the police or anybody that's in a position of influence that could maybe contribute in a positive way towards this. So section 5 here, moving forward, and this is how we would then move forward, as the title suggests, into a much more lenient, open society towards cannabis. And you've started off with discretionary decriminalisation by the police, which you just mentioned is largely based on due diligence, and there's several constabularies throughout the UK that are already applying this. Misconduct in public office on a grand scale, is this essentially prosecuting those that have been held accountable for maintaining this illegitimate law?
Yes. So the next stage really is looking at the government themselves. So, you know, we're going to send this out to every MP. Whenever somebody sends a letter to an MP regarding cannabis, they always get the same generic response from the Home Office saying there's clear scientific evidence for harm. Now, if we send this report to all these MPs and counteract that evidence, the MPs should, you know, respond and actually bring this up in Parliament. And then there's the Home Office and the ACMD, who are really responsible. You know, we're going to send the report to them and see what they come back with. And ideally, we want to put the pressure on the government to do the right thing for the people and for the environment and for the economy, and remove cannabis completely from all drug scheduling, remove it from the Misuse of Drugs Act, and have a regulated market for everybody.
You just perfectly mentioned that they deschedule and remove cannabis from the Misuse of Drugs Act. As we mentioned before, let food be thy medicine, let medicine be thy food. Cannabinoids, a new classification and a regulated market. New classification being cannabinoids as the classification themselves. A regulated market is what you've mentioned there previously about similar to the Canadian market. So, I mean, how would we actually transfer that over, though? That's one of the things that I often hear from people that have CBD shops in particular, that then the Novel Foods Act, which is an extreme difficulty for small time people that are selling CBD who've got a legitimate product, but they don't have the money to conform to these regulations. I mean, what would you say to those individuals, and how is it looking essentially for a regulated market for cannabinoids?
It's looking pretty scary for the CBD industry at the minute, because, you know, I was involved from the very beginning actually with the novel foods situation, and originally it was only isolates that were novel, because it wasn't a full botanical extract. Once you remove it to a certain, you know, to an isolate, it's not a full botanical extract, so therefore it's a new food.
Yeah.
But they changed it to all cannabinoids being novel, which based on no evidence again. And now the novel foods applications have all been stopped in Europe, and now Europe are starting to classify all cannabinoids as narcotics, even CBD, which is non-psychoactive. So it just shows you there's a lot of lobbying going on and pressure on all the governments and the European Union and the UN. There's a lot of pressure being placed on it, and all we need is some basic truth, some basic evidence to just drop the whole thing. It's not novel. It's been used for thousands of years. There's plenty of evidence of that. We went to the European Commission as the CTA a couple of years ago and provided lots of evidence of its use, and it was ignored.
What do you think this is, this new acceleration? And I was completely unaware that there was an accelerant of clamping down on cannabinoids. What do you think's pushing this? Is this because it's becoming more socially available when it comes to the society, that they're more encouraging now?
Well, put it this way, pharmaceutical companies are losing billions in revenue from lack of sales of normal painkillers like aspirin and paracetamol, ibuprofen, because people are using CBD instead. So it's, again, monopoly for corporations.
Yeah, it warrants a very deep sigh.
People above money instead of the other way around.
Exactly, and the thing is as well, I hear that often, what you just mentioned there, that it's the pharmaceuticals, and sometimes it makes me frustrated because I was like, it's deeper than the pharmaceuticals, but the reality is the level of influence and lobbyist power that the pharmaceutical industry has is unprecedented when it comes to cannabinoids in particular, because it's so collected within their category of influence. It's pharmaceutical industry, therefore medicine is their game, essentially. Again, how would you combat that? What can you combat? The way I see this as well is, like, when I'm talking to friends about this, the only way you can protest is cultivate your own, spread the message that cannabis is good for you, tell everybody you have an endocannabinoid system, and just continuously disregard these illegitimate laws.
I think the legal structures of corporations need to be looked at, because when you have a corporation, their main priority is profits for shareholders. They don't care about people's health or the environment, and we've seen this with lots of companies being sued for billions for opioids, addictions, and all sorts of things. So that would be one thing, to actually put responsibility on the corporations themselves. But also politicians, people in public service, shouldn't be able to gain financially from a corporation. It should be a conflict of interest, as it would be with any director within a company. It should be made illegal. If you take the money out of the situation for people in power, then they'll do what they're supposed to be doing, which is looking after the people in the environment.
Yeah. Money is always the money is the root of evil, as they say, and it certainly seems apparent. So a new normal, health, environment, and the economy. The new normal, as you've mentioned, COVID, we're continuously getting told to adjust to a new normal, to a new normal over and over. And you're promoting the same thing, is like, we can adjust to a new normal with health through cannabinoids, through the environment, through the use of hemp as an agricultural product, and through the economy as both recreational cannabis and a cannabinoid-based food supplement industry. So how would you move forward more so? At the moment we have shops all across the UK selling CBD, and what would you suggest for steps to accelerate that position?
Well, as I said, with the CBD market, it's available. All we need to do is expand the product range to CBD and THC products of different profiles. We just need the laws to be made illegitimate and removed, and the regulation's pretty much there. We could do it very quickly, and of course the government would make a hell of a lot on tax revenue. They'd make at least $1 billion in the first year, not to mention what the new economy would bring in with all the different technologies. It's silly, because the government would get so many brownie points for doing this, and help the economy and help our health and help the NHS, all the things that they spout about all the time, and all they have to do is stop this one law.
Yeah. We'll just end here then, Guy, with at the very end of the report, you've written here, we do not want a move in classification or licensing. We don't want legalization which supports corporate interests. We demand that cannabis is immediately and completely removed from all drug scheduling and licensing, that people regain their right to cultivate and consume cannabis for personal use, that the endocannabinoid system is added to all biology curricula, especially within medical training, and that medical practitioners are allowed to prescribe cannabis-based medicinal products, not as a last resort, but as they see fit. Is this crucial? And it's quite interesting in particular when it comes to legalization. Most people say, let's for legalization. You've already mentioned because it promotes corporate interest. Could you elaborate more on why you're against legalization and what you would put in place?
Yeah, because when you use the term legalization, it normally puts it into the hands of corporations. We're already seeing this with certain groups in the UK who have very close ties with the Conservative government, and they're very much pushing for all the big companies like Aurora from Canada and so on to move in and take over and monopolize the industry. This isn't what we want, and this is what actually destroyed the industry in the first place, this monopolization. What we need to have is the grassroots movement, the cottage industry, like we've already got with the CBD industry, taking it on. And, you know, that's going to create more jobs. The wealth will be spread more. And you know, a lot of these big companies are very much moving towards synthetic and isolated compounds and creating cannabinoid profiles from synthetics, which would mean they would never need to even grow the plant itself. And that's dangerous. You know, you just have to look at spice for an example. That's a synthetic cannabinoid, and that's causing devastation in the streets. Yeah. You know, you can't replace the natural plant, but because the plant has 500 compounds that all work synergistically together, it can't be patented by a company. And that was the problem in the first place. So we need to just, you know, respect the plant, keep it as it is. It's had 300 million years of evolution to be perfect as it is. Leave it alone. You know, let's just enjoy the plant, utilize the plant, and help us all grow.
So what would be your next, what would you recommend to anybody wanting to become active in cannabis, want to support the campaign? What would you recommend for anybody wanting to become active?
Come and have a look at our website, www.seedourfuture.co.uk. Join us on social media. We've got a Facebook group. We're on Instagram, Twitter. You know, we do very much work with the people in our groups, our supporters. You know, we get them involved. We give them tasks to do. So it's quite interactive. So yeah, anybody who wants to help, please do, and just share the report to anybody you can.
Excellent. And what are the steps? What are the next steps that you have in store for See Their Future? Do you have anything else lined up, or is it just to see the response?
So yesterday we sent it out to all the police and the media. So we're hoping to get some coverage by national media, which would really help because that will get more people aware. And then our next stage is to basically push this on the government, which we're planning on doing on November the 5th. Yeah. we're gonna send a truth bomb to Parliament.
Yeah, and it's the timely.
Just the truth, though, nothing illegal.
Yeah, no, it's a timely moment for it, then, Guy. Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much for chatting with me, Guy. This has been extremely informative. I've really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Guy for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoy the content. I'll see you next time.